Hey, how's it going? This is Jack Oberkirsch with HomeMusicMaker.com. Today we're going to be doing a video on 10 drawbacks of Reaper. A couple videos ago, I did a video titled 15 Reasons Why Reaper is the Best DAW, and I stand by that. I love Reaper. I think it's a great DAW, but while I was doing that video, I realized there's a couple things about it that aren't that great, so I wanted to do a video on 10 drawbacks of Reaper. Before we get into it, make sure to go ahead and like, comment, subscribe, ding the bell on this video to be notified about others. We got a bunch of awesome content on the way and you don't want to miss out. All right, cool. Let's get into it. My first drawback of Reaper is that there's no virtual instrument plugins or audio samples, loops, one-shots, etc. Although I do love the overall interface of Reaper and the DAW itself, it does not come loaded with these extras such as other DAWs like Logic, FL Studio, etc. So yeah, there's no audio samples, one-shots, or loops of any kind that come standard with Reaper. And then there's technically one virtual instrument. Let's check it out. It's called REAPER. But the reason I say there's no VST instruments is that this thing is pretty weak. So let's just take a listen real quick. So as you can see, it's a really basic synthesizer. Not much going on there. Of course, you can change the mix here a little bit, change your wave shape, but for the most part, ReaSynth is a pretty worthless synthesizer patch, or a synthesizer plugin in my opinion. So for that reason, I say Reaper has no virtual instruments, audio samples, one-shots, or loops. So that's my first Reaper drawback. My second Reaper drawback is that the plugins, while they are usable, they sound pretty good, they're pretty ugly. So let's go take a look at what I'm talking about. Let's grab a couple, go to Kakos, go with Rea EQ, Rea Delay, and Rea Comp, just to show you what I'm talking about. So take a look at these plugins. It almost looks like a Microsoft Excel-like equation here. It's super boring. Whereas if you look at the plugins for Logic, I know for sure, and then other DAWs as well, they have a cool visual display, some kind of emulator where they look like a piece of audio hardware. Something a bit more exciting than this, but these are pretty bare bones. And like I said, while they do sound pretty good, they're just not much fun to work with, and I prefer using other plugins for sure. I don't often use the Reaper plugins. And of course, looks don't really matter when it comes to mixing, but in my opinion, I work on music production every single day, and I like to have plugins that are kind of fun to use. That's just my opinion. So while they are totally usable, Reaper has ugly plugins, and that's drawback number 2. My third Reaper drawback is the fact that there's a little bit less compatibility with MIDI devices. And this is something that I've had an issue with in the past. For example, on my desk right here, I have a Nano Control 2 MIDI controller, which has all kinds of faders, as well as, play and stop button, a record button. So you can use this to connect to a DAW and play, stop, record, control MIDI parameters. So that's what I use it for, and it works okay in Reaper, but I will say in general, like when I started using Logic, I was able to get that thing set up just the way I like it, whereas in Reaper, I was kind of tearing my hair out just a little bit. So that's reason number 3, is that there's a little bit less MIDI compatibility. All right, drawback number 4 for why Reaper is maybe not the best DAW, or why some people might not like it, is the fact that there's no app for it. I just recently started learning Logic, and something that's awesome for it is if you go to the App Store and get Logic Controller app, you can use this Logic controller to control Logic from across the room. I mean, pretty much anywhere in a building for the most part, as long as they're connected to the same Wi-Fi signal. The Logic app, and I know other DAWs have apps as well, it makes it super easy to work on recording something in your studio instead of having to run back and forth to your computer between every take. I will say there is a website way to do this with Reaper, so I'm going to show you that real quick. If you wanted to do this, you would go Options, Preferences, scroll down to Control, Oscillator Web. You would go ahead and click Add Web Browser Interface. Check this box and put in an ID, and then after you press Apply Settings, go to rc.reaper.fm, type in your ID, and then a controller will actually pop up on your device. You can use this on any device. So there is a way to have a Reaper controller, but there's no specific app for it, so it's a bit more of a pain. That's drawback number 4 for Reaper, is that there's no app and there's no way to work on Reaper remotely. I would love if there was a Reaper app to record some music on the go, so hopefully that'll come along one day. Moving on to Reaper drawback number 5, and this is kind of a major one, I feel like for a lot of people. There's a lot less users of Reaper than compared to pretty much any other DAW other than, maybe Audacity or any DAWs that are even newer. And although Reaper is gaining traction and respect, in my opinion, as it should, not too many people use it. So this is a problem because sometimes I'll be collaborating with a producer and then sending stems is just a total pain because I can't send them the project file. I have to actually go through and sort all the stems. So yeah, the fact that there's less Reaper users is drawback number 5. Hopefully, as time goes on, because it is a great DAW, the number of users kind of picks up. So moving on to Reaper drawback number 6. And this one, I guess you could say, is a little bit related to number 5, but number 6 is that some people look down on it. I've definitely talked to music producers who have some kind of stigma about Reaper, and I'll be like, yeah, I use Reaper, and they look at me like, oh dang, you must not know anything. And actually, anybody that uses Reaper knows how incredible of a DAW it is. It's the reason I still use it after all this time. There's not a single thing in Reaper that I can't do. Although there's, a couple areas for improvement, some of which I'm identifying in this video. For the most part, it's just such a great DAW. So yeah, reason number 6 is some people kind of look down on it and maybe even look down on you for using Reaper. And again, I hope this is another thing that kind of clears up over time. It really doesn't deserve any kind of stigma. It's an incredible DAW. I feel like the audio community more and more is starting to recognize it. Cool. So let's move on. We're going to move on to drawback number 7 of Reaper. And again, this is kind of related to the same thing again. It's that there's a lack of tutorials. If you go on YouTube or whatnot, DAWs like Pro Tools and Logic, they've been around for decades now. So anything that you need to figure out for the most part, any problem you find under the sun, there's at least like 5 to 6 tutorials for it. And while there are some great people that make Reaper tutorials, myself included, just kidding. While there are some great Reaper tutorials out there, there's definitely a lack when compared to other DAWs. So that being said, the lack of tutorials makes it a little bit harder to figure some things out sometimes. Like if there's a function that's kind of a tricky function or has a tricky process that you have to follow, sometimes you have to try to go it alone or, go off of less than reliable sources. So yeah, that's reason number 7 for Reaper drawback, is that there's a lack of tutorials and general resources on the internet. Cool. Let's move on to Reaper drawback number 8. And this is one kind of directly pertaining to Logic. And I'm not sure about other DAWs, but I know Logic has an amazing MIDI drummer function where you can select certain parameters like genre and type of groove, a number of fills, etc., and it'll actually give you a MIDI drum track. See, this is a great feature because instead of having to actually go through and build a drum track like this one, for example, let's just take a listen real quick. You could possibly generate something like that using the Logic MIDI drummer. So yeah, and just kind of these MIDI features in general, I hope it's something that Reaper kind of jumps on board of in the near future, because while it is such a great DAW, I think there's some things they could do to modernize Reaper and just give it that cutting edge that a lot of music producers are looking for. And one of those is a MIDI drummer. So yeah, that's reason or drawback number 8 of Reaper, is that there's no MIDI drummer. Next thing, this is something that I hear other Reaper users complain about. Myself, I don't mind it so much, but it's the MIDI editor. So let's go ahead and open up this MIDI track. To open up the MIDI track, the MIDI editor, you just double click a MIDI track. And you can make the window bigger or smaller. And Reaper's MIDI editor definitely has kind of a different layout than other DAWs. So some people don't like it. To see the notes, you got to zoom in really close and zoom out. But see, in my opinion, it's not so bad. Let's take a look at the features real quick. Piano roll, that's to turn it on or off. Named notes to turn those on or off. Event list, musical notation. Then this is just kind of different ways the notes can be shown. Filter on and off. This can filter certain notes if you want to. And then here's a track list of the different tracks that would have MIDI so that you can switch between them. I kind of like that feature a lot. Quantize, we'll go over that in a second. CC selection follows. Envelopes travel with the MIDI notes. Show the grid or not. This will snap MIDI notes to the grid or not. I usually leave that off. Step sequencing, and then dock editor. See, if you do that, you can get it down here. I prefer it as a window. If you dock it like that, it actually is much more similar to other DAWs. I feel like a lot of DAWs typically have it docked down here. And I think a lot of the main reason that a lot of people don't like the MIDI editor is it, like the plugins, it looks kind of archaic. It's not very modern looking. It's not very sleek looking. I work with MIDI all the time though. I don't mind it. I think it's relatively easy to move the notes around just by clicking and dragging. You can change the length by just hovering over until you get that icon and then clicking and dragging. You can change the velocity down here, as well as you get some more options once you select each note. So in my opinion, it's a fully functional MIDI editor. I would agree though, it's not exactly the most beautiful interface for MIDI editing. So maybe that's something they can improve upon, but for the most part, I don't think it's too bad. So we're going to move on to drawback number 10 of Reaper. This is the final drawback. And this is something that definitely bugs me. And it's something, if anyone has any tips on, that would be great. But the quantizing MIDI in Reaper is, in my opinion, pretty bad. So I said we were going to go back to this quantize function. Right now it's off. I typically manually quantize in Reaper because, to be honest, I've been using Reaper for 5 or 6 years now, and it just doesn't work very well. So if everything's super close to the grid, like this track, everything was pretty close to the grid, and that's actually probably the best Reaper quantizing I've ever seen. But for the most part, if you have a track that's a bit farther off than that, the function does not work very well, especially compared to maybe Logic or something. In my opinion, Logic has an awesome quantize function. So yeah, in my opinion, the Reaper one, a lot of the times, like for example, that one section looked good, but then this section, it quantized them where I do not need the notes. So for that very reason, turning quantize off, make sure it's off. But yeah, that's Reaper drawback number 10. I do not like the Reaper quantizing window or the Reaper quantizing MIDI function. So yeah, but anyway, guys, thanks for tuning in today. I appreciate you checking out the video. Make sure to go ahead and like, comment, subscribe, ding the bell to be notified about other videos. We got a bunch of awesome content coming your way. You don't want to miss out. Once again, my name's Jack Oberkirsch with homemusicmaker.com. Thanks for tuning in. Have a nice day.